Well, to the best of my knowledge, he was probably about 12 when he first started to experiment with alcohol and weed, and it just gradually kind of bloomed into other drugs that he would experiment with. The kids that he was running with were all experimenting with whatever they could get their hands on, and as he got older, of course, the drugs became more serious, and he went through countless rehabs trying to get himself together, and it just didn't happen. He'd come out and he'd be good for a while, but he could never separate himself from the friends, and that was the key there, was that if you can't walk away from the people that are that world, you can't stay clean. So he couldn't do that. They were his bros, they were his best friends, and his big line always was, "Don't worry, Mom, my bros have my back." And quite obviously they didn't, since they were responsible for letting him die. So it kind of showed me just exactly who they were, but it was too late for him to see that. I guess he was about 16 or 17 the first time we really had an issue, and at around 17, he started taking drugs from others. My parents were still alive, and they had pain medications and different things. I took an anti-anxiety, which, we got to the point where we locked my stuff into a locked box so that he figured out how to pry it open without unlocking it to get into the box so he could steal the medication. But he started stealing from us, not just drugs, but then he started stealing things and hawking them and to pay for the habit. He never worked because he said that only fools work. I can make so much more money just doing this, so why should I work? And he had the freedom to come and go and do what he wanted. And for a while I kind of worked with that, and then I did the tough love and said, no, you're not going to do this in my house. I'm not going to have this. And I put him out. And he bounced from house to house to house, living with friends, and sometimes he said he slept on benches in a park, and I really don't know. And then he would call and tell me he's hungry. "I'm starving, Mom. I haven't had anything to eat in days." And I'm like, he goes, "Can you give me some money for some food?" I said, "No, I'll take you to eat. I'll go buy you groceries, but no, I won't give you cash." And at first he was kind of upset with me because I knew that's what he wanted. He wanted to buy a fix, and he didn't have the money, so he was hoping I'd hand him cash, and I never gave him the money. I'd buy him a pack of cigarettes even if that's what he wanted, but I kind of figured out, it took me a little while, but I kind of figured out that if I gave him cash, it was just going back into a drug. I think watching his grandparents being so ill kind of made him see that he needed to straighten his life around. My father was probably his greatest influence in life. He was the only man that was ever there his whole life. And he respected my father and loved my father, and he was it. And watching my dad become so ill and watching him die, I think kind of was like a wake-up call for him. And then we only had a couple of months after my dad passed when my mom was diagnosed with cancer. So when he'd see those things, it kind of would straighten him around, like, I got to get myself together because, life's too short. Look at what's gone on. They've lived their lives, and now look what they're suffering. And, he would do real well for a little while, and then he'd run into somebody. It was always somebody that took him back into the world that he didn't need to be in. But there was no way to keep him away from it because they were everywhere. Everywhere he went, he would run into people. And none of us ever expected to get the knock at the door, and when a cop comes to your door. And I didn't even have to ask which kid it was. I knew the minute the police officer walked in the house. I knew exactly who he was there for. He was at somebody else's house where there were a lot of other people, and Craig had drugs in his system, so he did have drugs. But Craig didn't die because of a drug overdose necessarily. Yes, they ruled it that, but he had a cheeseburger and he started to choke, and they laid him on his back on the floor and watched him aspirate on his own vomit and did nothing. He was dead an hour before they even dialed 911. everybody's different. And I don't think, honestly, Craig didn't set out to die. I'm sure that that was not his plan that night. I'm quite positive that he went over to hang with his friends, and he thought he was Superman. You know, he's got the mentality that so many of our young people have, that they're invincible, that I can do this, I can do that, and it won't hurt me, it won't touch me, because I'm different. You're all different, but you're all the same. And everybody's triggers are different, but the same. And it's the same thing with getting help. I mean, I don't know if he ever had that ultimate click. I mean, he would do good for a while and then he'd fall back off. And I don't know how he could have done anything differently. I really don't. I don't have an answer, and I don't even know what to tell anybody that's completely dealing with it, because every single person walking in that drug world is a different person. Some people, you know, he never OD'd. That was the only time. He never OD'd before that. He had never had a close call. He had seen many close calls, but he had personally never had a close call. And even the people that were with him that night, that watched him, stood there, watched him. And there was a parent in that house that he was in, and she stood there with her 10-year-old and watched my son die and did nothing. And even those people that were there that night, they're still doing the same things. I mean, I've had countless times been told, oh, by the way, so-and-so OD'd. And I'm just like, you watched your friend die in front of your eyes. You watched him take his last breath, and you're still doing the same thing. You didn't learn anything from watching him. I mean, how can you keep walking that life? And then I found out later that there was people that were there that were sober. They were clean. There was nothing. They had nothing in their system. They were just there hanging out, and they left because they didn't want to get in trouble, and never dialed 911. I mean, if you're going to leave, fine, but you could have called 911 first and at least gotten him help, because the coroner told me his was a totally preventable death, that he should never have died. But due to the ignorance of the people he was with, it happened. He's like, he said, I can't tell you how many times I see this where they could have been helped, but nobody bothered to call for help.